present, but the creator of the future. I think this is the crux of the theme of this 2-day seminar, that resurgent India, emerging Bharat, revisiting glorious past. Then why we need to revisit our glorious past? Because India of the ages is not dead, nor she has spoken her last creative words. So, let me clarify. I am neither a scholar, nor do I possess any scholarship. I am just a messenger of Sri Ramakrishna Paramahansa, Swami Vivekananda, and Maharishi Sri Aurobindo. Yet, I have accepted your invitation with all humility, with heartfelt thanks and gratitude to the entire fraternity of Assam University, Silchar. So, first, my today's piece is basically a compilation, basically a sort of compilations from the writings of 4 personalities. Sri Aurobindo, Vivekananda, Shishir Kumar Mitra, one of the great disciples of Mahayogi Sri Aurobindo, and another one, Ram Swarupji, the only living sage, perhaps in my opinion, of the post-independent India, Ram Swarupji. So let me first revisit the glorious past and why we need to revisit our glorious past. Shishir Kumar Mitra writes, the past of India has yet to be deeply looked into and properly appraised. We have not looked into our past properly. And why it is necessary? Why we need to revisit our past? Because it is therefore necessary to emphasize that an insight and a correct revisioning of the cultural achievements of the race in their true perspective are indispensable. Indispensable from what point of view? Indispensable in their true perspective are indispensable to the future rebuilding of India. To the future rebuilding of India, to the understanding of the forces that are to bring about a resurgence of her soul. So we need to revisit because our past is related to, because our past is related to the rebuilding of our future race, future India. We need to revisit because it is related to the forces. We need to know the forces that are to bring about a resurgence of our past. So the soul, the resurgence, and the forces that are to bring about a resurgence of India. Shishir Kumar then says, the inner India, her soul, has yet to say her last liberating word, the word that shall bring into birth a new world and solve forever the problems of mankind. So when we look into our glorious past, we are to look into 3 great periods of India. Maharishi says, her first period was luminous with the discovery of the spirit. Her first period was luminous with the discovery of the spirit. And her second completed the discovery of the dharma. And what is the meaning of dharma will be explained later on. Her third elaborated into detail first simpler formation of Shastra. So first was the discovery of spirit, followed by discovery of dharma, and the third was the formulation of Shastras. Then Maharishi elaborates. The first age of India's greatness was a spiritual age. And what did we do in that period? When she sought passionately for the truth of existence through the intuitive mind, and through an inner experience, and interpretation both of the psychic and the physical science, physical existence. So intuitive mind, inner experience, and the interpretation both of the psychic implies inner. So psychic and the physical existence. And even in our decline, even in the hour of, and what that thing is? India's spirituality. We could never lose. So what was the second period? India's? Therefore, the second long epoch of India's greatness was an age of the intellect. This is the meaning of dharma. The first was the discovery of spirit. The second age was the discovery of dharma. And the discovery of dharma means the second long epoch of India's greatness was an age of intellect. Not the intuitive mind then. The ethical sense and the dynamic will in action. So this is what is called the age of dharma. So age of dharma means age of intellect, the ethical sense, and the dynamic will in action. Enlightened to formulate and govern life in the luster of spiritual truth. In the luster of spiritual truth. So intellectuality in the light of spirituality. Ethical governing of life in the light of intuitive vision. And here, let me quote Vivekananda's one of the great utterance. Vivekananda uttered that before flooding India with socialistic or political ideas, first deluge the land with spiritual ideas. First deluge the land with spiritual ideas. Why? Because first deluge the land with spiritual ideas, the other ideas will follow. The other ideas will follow. Because our first age was an age of spirit. So first age was the discovery of spirit, followed by the discovery of dharma. So first deluge the land with the spiritual ideas will follow. So that was our second period. And what was the third period? What was the third period? And we can elaborate in other way that after the age of the spirit, the age of the dharma, after the Veda and Upanishads, the heroic centuries of action and social formation. After the Veda and Upanishad, the heroic centuries of action and social formation, tribal construction, thought and philosophy. This is what is called age of dharma. So when the outward forms of Indian life and culture were fixed in their long lines, in this age of second period. So first, discovery of spirit, intuitive mind, inner experience, and interpretation both of the psychic and physical existence. Then the age of intellect, the ethical sense, the dynamic will in action, enlightened to formulate and govern life in the luster of spirituality. So after the age of dharma, after the age of spirit, it was the age of dharma. After the age of Veda and Upanishads, the heroic centuries of action and social formation, tribal construction, and thought and philosophy. And what was the third age? Mahayogi says, the great classical age. The great classical age. The third age. And in that period, what we did? The great classical age of Sanskrit culture was the flowering of its intellectuality. So second period was the age of intellect. But the classical age of the classical age of Sanskrit period was the flowering of that intellectuality. Was the flowering of that intellectuality. So the great classical age of Sanskrit culture was the flowering of this intellectuality into curiosity of detail. Into curiosity of detail, in the refinement of scholarship, science, art, literature, politics, sociology, mundane life. And we see at this time even the sounding of aesthetic, emotional, sensuous, even of vital and sensual experience. So this is our third age, the third age of our classical age of Sanskrit literature. First age, it was the discovery of spirit. Second age, our discovery of dharma. That is the intellect, ethical sense, and the dynamic will in action. And third age is the great classical age. Then the fourth age. What was the fourth age? Fourth age was, Maharishi says, it is the post-classical period. What was that period? In the classical age, our whole spirituality reigned behind in our classical period, because that was the period of intellectuality. That was the flowering of our intellectuality. So, in its later period, the post-classical, what India did, saw a lifting up of the whole lower being. Lifting up of the whole lower being, whole lower life, and impressing it of the values of the spirit. So lower life needs to be enlightened. So lower life was taken, lower life was attempted to be elevated. So that was the post-classical period. You may call it the age of Puran and Tantra. Puranic age or the Tantric age. And our goal was lifting up of the whole lower life, lifting up of the whole lower life and impressing upon it of the values of the spirit. This was the sense of the Puranic and Tantric system and the religions of Bhakti movement. So first the age of spirit, then followed by the age of Dharma. First was the age of spirituality, age of intuition, followed by the age of intellectuality, what is called discovery of Dharma, social formulation, the flowering of that intellectuality, which is known as the classical age of Sanskrit period. And the third was the Puranic and Tantric and the religions of Bhakti period. And fifth period, Mahayogi has termed it as the latter Vaishnavism. He has termed it as the latter Vaishnavism. And what we did in that period, in that fifth period, the latter Vaishnavism, Mahayogi has interpreted it as the last flower of the Indian spirit. Last flower of the Indian spirit was in its essence aesthetic, emotional and sensuous being into the service of the spiritual. So first was the age of spirit, discovery of the spirit with intuition. Second was the age of Dharma, that is the age of intellectuality. Third period was the flowering of that intellectuality. That is the classical age of Sanskrit period. Third was taking up of the whole lower life. Taking up of the whole lower life into the, taking up of the whole lower life and impressing upon it of the values of the spirit. And that is the sense of the Puranic and the Tantric and the Bhakti religions. And the fifth period, in the later Vaishnavism, it is the taking up of the aesthetic, emotional, and sensuous being. Taking up of the aesthetic, emotional, and sensuous being into the service of spiritual. After that, evening of decline. After that, evening of decline. So, in a short, these were the 5 periods. First, the discovery of the spirit, followed by the discovery of Dharma, the great classical age of Sanskrit. Fourth was the Puran and Tantra and the periods of Bhakti religions. That is the taking up of the lower life. And the fifth period was the latter Vaishnavic period. Taking up of the whole aesthetic, emotional and into the service of the spiritual. And then the evening of decline. This evening of decline was prepared by 3 movements. We shall be discussing those three movements. But first, what was the characteristics of ancient Indian soul? What do you mean by India's soul? What is that India's soul? If we are asked, what is Bharat Atma? What is the strength of India? What are the strength of India? So, the soul of India has 3 elements. 3 elements means we have 3 powers. So the soul of India is consisting of 3 elements. What was the first element? Maharishi says, spirituality is indeed the master key of Indian mind. Spirituality is the master key of Indian mind. The sense of infinite is native to it. But this was not the only strength of India. This is not the only element of the soul of India. The second thing, Maharishi says, when we look at the past of India, what strikes us next is her stupendous vitality. Stupendous vitality. And what is the meaning of vitality? Her inexhaustible power of life, joy of life. Her almost unimaginably prolific creativeness. So prolific creativeness, joy of life, and the power of life. That is what is called the power of vitality, Pran Shakti. So first was the spirituality, first power. Second power was the vitality. That is the joy of life, power of life, and the unimaginably prolific creativeness. And what was the third power we had? The third power is the intellectuality. Third power is the intellectuality. For the third power of the ancient Indian spirit was a strong intellectuality. At once austere and rich, robust and minute, powerful and delicate, massive in principle and curious in detail. This is the characteristics of spirituality. What are those characteristics? At once austere and rich, robust and minute, powerful and delicate, massive in principle and curious in detail. And with this intellectuality, what we did, Maharishi gave an account in his Renaissance in India. Just let me read what we did with this spirituality, with this intellectuality. Maharishi writes, in this third period, the curious elaboration of all life into a science and art assumes extraordinary proportions. The mere mass of the intellectual production during the period from Ashoka well into the Mohammedan epoch is something truly prodigious. Something truly prodigious. And then he writes, as can be seen at once if one studies the account which recent scholarship gives of it. And we must remember that scholarship as yet only deals with a fraction of what is still lying extant. So written and known. So we are dealing with only a fraction of what is extant. And what is extant is a small percentage of what once written and known. So that was the amount of intellectual production. So, and that is why Maharishi used the word something truly prodigious. Something truly prodigious. So, the soul of India was constituted, or the soul of India is consisting of these three elements. First one is spirituality, followed by vitality. Vitality means joy of life, power of life, unimaginably prolific creativeness. And third one was the strong intellectuality. And what was the characteristics of that intellectuality? It was at once austere and rich, robust and minute, powerful and delicate, massive in principle and curious in detail. So then we need to know how the evening of decline was prepared. Maharishi says the evening of decline was prepared by three movements. First, there is comparatively a sinking of that superabundant vital energy. हम लोगों का प्राण शक्ति सुखा गया था. इसीलिए we were the first power of India's soul, that vitality, pran shakti. So The first, there is comparatively a sinking of that superabundant vital energy and a fading of the joy of life and the joy of creation. Joy of creation, joy of life, fading of that superabundant vitality. First movement. Second movement, secondly, there is a rapid cessation of the all free intellectual activity. Rapid cessation of the all free intellectual activity and a slumber of the scientific and the critical mind as well as the creative intuition. And the third movement, finally, spirituality remains. Spirituality remains, but no longer with large and clear flame of knowledge of former times, but in intense jets and in a dispersed action which replaces the old magnificent synthesis. So this was the three movements which prepared the evening of decline. But Maharishi in another occasion says, but the root of the matter was the dwindling of the spiritual impulse in its generality and broadness. Number one, the first cause of decline, our first cause of decline. Second was the decline of intellectual activity and freedom. Decline of intellectual activity and freedom. And third, waning of great ideals. Waning of great ideals. And fourth one was the loss of the gust of life. Loss of the gust of life. Loss of vitality. Pran Shakti, joy of life. That prolific creativeness. And in this moment, Maharishi says, the European wave sweeping over India. So, the European wave sweeping over India, and what are the consequences of this sweeping over? Maharishi says, first consequence, the first effect of this entry of a new and quite opposite civilization was the destruction of mass that had no longer the power to live. Destruction of the mass that had no longer the power to live. Number second, delinquence of mass ills. Delinquence means stagnation, inertia, stagnation. And the third, a tendency to the devitalization of the rest. So this was the consequence of European sweeping over. So first one was the destruction of mass that had no longer the power to live, the delinquence of mass ills, and a tendency to the devitalization of the rest. But Maharishi says it gave three needed impulses. Though these were the three negative consequences, but this European sweeping over gave three needed impulse. And what are those three needed impulse? Number one, it revived the dormant intellectual and critical impulse. So it revived the dormant intellectual and critical impulse. Number second, the rehabilitated life and awakened the desire of new creation. New creation. And number third, it put the reviving Indian spirit face to face with novel condition and ideals. So these are the three needed impulse that European sweeping over gave us. So the three movement, we have lost our vitality, we have lost our spirituality, we have lost our intellectuality. But that, in that period of the evening of decline, that means the European sweeping over of India gave us three needed impulse. The first one was it revived the dormant intellectual and critical impulse. It rehabilitated life and awakened the desire of new creation. And number third, it put the revival Indian spirit face to face with noble condition and ideals. Now let us discuss about the reawakening. What was that reawakening? What was the meaning of the reawakening? So we have discussed about the glorious past, the evening of decline, the causes of the evening of decline, and the consequence of the evening of decline, and along with that evening of decline, giving us three needed impulse, which resulted in a reawakening. So what was that reawakening? We have practically to take three facts into consideration. The great past of Indian culture, and life with moment of inadaptive torpor into which it had lapsed. Next, the first period of the Western contact, in which it seemed for a moment likely to perish by slow decomposition. And the third period was the ascending movement, that is the period of the reawakening. So these are the three factors we have to take into consideration: the glorious past, second, the Western domination, and the third was the ascending movement. Then Maharishi says that in that period, the period of ascending movement, what India did, the national mind turned a new eye on its past culture. Reawake to its sense and import, but also at the same time saw it in relation to modern knowledge and ideas. Out of this awakening vision and impulse, the Indian Renaissance is arising. And that must determine its future tendency. Ramswarupji writes, but when the initial shock was over and the military presence became less obtrusive, though not less real, and some kind of civic life returned, and we also became more familiar with the victor, a measured reaction and strategy emerged. What was that measured strategy? A military political influence. And felt renewed by it. They saw in Hinduism an incomparable truth, or at least a truth by which alone India could rise. Then Ramswarup says India's struggle was more than political. So for them means for those national leaders, Dayananda, Bankim, Vivekananda. For them, India's struggle was more than political. For them, either they reached spiritual content, had a deeper intent. India was fighting for Swarajya, not mere withdrawal of political control, but India was fighting for Swarajya for Swadharma. For self-recovery. To many, it was sufficient if the British political control was withdrawn and replaced by a government controlled by the Indians themselves. But to these leaders, this was not sufficient. They wanted the country to realize its full potential, to wake up to its soul life, that spirituality, intellectuality, and the vitality. They wanted the country to realize its full potential, to wake up to its soul life. So, Ramswarupji says it was the movement for spiritual self-recovery and self-discovery. He says India's worldview is not economic, political, or ecclesiastical. India's message to itself as well as to the world, as propagated by its leaders, ancient and recent, was that of their spiritual self-recovery and self-discovery. So then we have to know what is the mission of India. Do you have any political mission? Do you have any military mission? Vivekananda says, categorically Vivekananda says, this is the theme of Indian life work. This is the theme of Indian life work, the burden of her eternal songs, the backbone of her existence, the foundation of her being, the raison d'etre of her very existence. And what is that? The spiritualization of the human race. This is the only one mission India have, the spiritualization of the whole human race. And Vivekananda thereafter says, in this, her life course, she has never deviated. She has never deviated, whether the Tatar ruled or the Turk, whether the Mughal ruled or the English. So this is our mission. So what is the mission of India? The spiritualization of the whole human race. Whole human race. Now, towards resurgent India. What is the meaning of resurgent India? What we may call a resurgent India. What is the conception? What do you mean by resurgent India? And what is the work before us? What is the work before us? Maharishi says, the work of the Indian Renaissance in India must be to make the spirit, that is spirituality plus intellectuality plus vitality, to make this spirit, this higher view of life, this sense of deeper potentiality once more a creative, perhaps a dominant power in the world. To make India's soul a dominant power in the world. And what is its meaning? He has given threefold national agenda. Threefold national agenda. The first one, the task before Indian Renaissance. First task, the recovery of the old spiritual knowledge and experience in all its splendor, depth and fullness is its first most essential work. Towards a resurgent India, our first task is the recovery of the old spiritual knowledge and experience in all its splendor. In all its splendor, depth and fullness is its first most essential work. Number one work. And what was the second agenda? The flowing of this spirituality. You have to flow this spirituality into where? The flowing of this spirituality into new forms of philosophy, literature, art, science, and critical knowledge is the second. So flowing of this spirituality into art, science, commerce, everything. A spiritually led society. That is the meaning of Vishwaguru. And what is the third? Maharishi says it is the most difficult. It is the most difficult. And what is that? An original dealing with modern problems. We have to deal with the modern problems. An original dealing with the modern problems in the light of the Indian spirit. An original dealing with modern problems in the light of the Indian spirit. And endeavor to formulate a greater synthesis of a spiritualized society is the third and most difficult. So, a greater synthesis for a spiritualized society. As Vivekananda says, spiritualization of the human race. And to solve the modern problems, to solve all human modern problems with the help of the Indian spirit. And for that, we are an original dealing with modern problems in the light of the Indian spirit. So these are the three agenda of the resurgent India. Then what is the mission of nationalism? What is the mission of nationalism? Maharishi says, to recover Indian thought, we are we always talk of nationalism. But what is the precise meaning of nationalism? What does it mean? Maharishi says, to recover Indian thought, to recover Indian character, to recover Indian perception, to recover Indian energy, to recover India's greatness, and to solve the problems that perplex the world in an Indian spirit. This is and from the Indian standpoint, and in our view, this is the mission of Indian nationalism. So first one is recovery of Indian thought, recovery of Indian character, recovery of Indian perception, recovery of Indian energy, recovery of Indian greatness. And out of that, we are to solve all modern problems in the light of India's spirit. From the standpoint of India, it is the mission of nationalism. But at the same time, Maharishi cautions us about the rich diversity of India. While recovering the Indian thought, Indian energy, we are also to focus on the rich diversity of India. Why? He says, but India is great by the unity of her national, coupled with the rich diversity of her regional mind. So rich diversity of the country has to be taken into consideration. While recovering Indian thought, Indian energy, Indian spirit, Indian greatness, rich diversity, rich regional diversity has to be taken into consideration. Because why? Maharishi says, India has an independent character. India has an independent character. The inner and outer body of India, the custom, culture, religion of its people have an independent character different from those of the rest of the world. So this is the sense of the mission of nationalism. Mission of nationalism, this is the agenda before us. 3 agenda, the recovery of spiritual knowledge, then flowing of this spirituality into new forms of philosophy, literature, art, science, and critical knowledge. And third, solving all modern problems with the light of India's spirit. And to make a synthesis for a spiritualized society. These are the 3 national agenda before us. And then I have discussed about the mission of nationalism, the rich diversity of India, and the independent character of India. Now, the way towards resurgence. How we are to bring about the resurgence of India. What are the ways? What we are to do for that? Maharishi says, the decline was the ebb movement of a creative spirit. So what is the meaning of decline? It is the ebb movement. Ebb movement, decline in spirituality, decline in creativeness, decline in vitality, decline of our intellectuality. So Maharishi says, what is the meaning of decline? In a single sentence, decline was the ebb movement. Ebb movement of a creative spirit. Bhata, which is called in Bengali and Assamese bhata. Sagorer bhata. Bhata jokhon pore. Bhata. So the decline was the ebb movement of a creating spirit. And what is the meaning of the resurgence? The renaissance is the return of the tide. Return of the tide, and the decline is the ebb movement, and the renaissance in the tide movement. Now, in India's resurgence, Maharishi says, India will certainly keep her essential spirit, but form will be new. With a new form of the old Indian Swadharma. Now that the salvation, the reawakening has come, India will certainly keep her essential spirit, will keep her characteristic soul, but there is likely to be a great change of the body. With a new form of the old Indian Swadharma. The shaping of itself of a new body of new philosophical, artistic, literary, cultural, political, social forms, but by the same soul rejuvenated will. I be the type of the Indian Renaissance, forms not contradicting of the truths of the life which the old expressed, but rather expressive of those truths restated, cured of defect, and completed. Then what is the technology of towards the resurgence? Mahajogi categorically and emphatically said that new creation in all sphere is the only strategy. New creation, Navasrishti, new creation. So a new creation of the old Indian Sadharma. A new creation of the old Indian Sadharma, not a transmutation to some law of the Western nature. Not a transmutation to some law of Western nature, but the new creation of the old Indian Sadharma. He has been repeatedly saying about new creation is the only strategy towards resurgence, toward the resurgence of India, towards a resurgent India. But he has also spoken about new creation with assimilation. First he has said new creation of the old Indian Sadharma. Then he says about new creation with the assimilation. Assimilation with what? Say, aggressive defense. Maharishi has advocated aggressive defense. And what is the meaning of aggressive defense? Aggressive defense implies a new creation from this inner and commanding vision. And while it demands a bringing of what we have to a more expressive force of form, it must allow also an effective assimilation of whatever is useful to our new life. So we will assimilate. We will assimilate new ideas, new modern ideas we will assimilate, but whatever is useful to us. He has used the word atmasat karana. Those which can be assimilated, only those ideas will be taken into consideration. So he has said about assimilative appropriation. So new creation with assimilation. And then he has again stressed that new creation with an entire getting back to the native power. So first he has said new creation of the old Indian Sadharma. Then he said new creation with assimilation of new ideas, whichever is essential for our new life. Then he has spoken about the new creation. He is stressing that new creation of an entire getting back to the native power. Entire native power. Then he said, new creation and self-finding of Renaissance. The beginning of this process of original creation in every shape of her national activity. Every shape of her national activity will be the sign of the integral self-finding of her Renaissance. And then Maharishi says, how India can best develop? Sri Aurobindo says, India can best develop herself by being herself. By being herself, India can best develop herself by being herself. India can best develop herself and serve humanity by being herself and following the law of her own nature. But then towards the end, Maharishi says, but one thing is certain. Whatever new creation we will be focusing on, but one thing is certain. That one thing seems at any rate certain, that the spiritual motive will be in the future of India, as in her past, the real originative and dominating strain. So spirituality will be the real originative and dominating strain. And then Maharishi says, by spirituality, we do not mean a remote metaphysical mind. By spirituality, we do not mean a remote metaphysical mind or the tendency to dream rather than to act. Then what he means by spirituality is a different topic. But he has cleared that by spirituality, we do not mean a remote metaphysical mind. Because spirituality has to be followed by a strong vitality. Spirituality has to be followed by a strong intellectuality. And last, let me conclude how we can keep alive this sentiment within us? So what would be the driving force? What is needed right now? What is the need of the hour? Maharishi says, what is the main feeder of patriotism? What is the main plan of campaign? That India has to be first among world. This was Swami Vivekananda's plan of campaign. Then Maharishi says, India can once more be made conscious of her greatness. By how? We can be conscious of India's greatness. But what is the strategy? Sri Aurobindo says, India can once more be made conscious of her greatness by an overmastering sense of the greatness of her spirituality. If we don't have any idea of the greatness of our spirituality, then we are not patriotic at all. Because the master key of India's mind is spirituality, is the master key of India. Spiritualization of the whole race is the raison d'etre of India. India has only one mission in this world, the spiritualization of the whole race. This is the sense of becoming Vishwaguru, not a military power like Hitler. So, Maharishi says, what is the main feeder of patriotism? By an overmastering, this sense of greatness is the main feeder of all patriotism. And what shape will be required? Then, Maharishi says, and the shape which keeps it alive is the realization of the motherhood of God in the country. Motherhood of God in the country. The vision of the mother, the knowledge of the mother, the perpetual contemplation, adoration, and service of the mother. This is the shape we need. He has spoken about 4 things. That the realization of the motherhood of God in the country. Country is not the river. Country is not the earth. Country is the mother, the God. Bhagavati Janani. The first condition, the shape that keeps it alive, the sense of patriotism. What is required first? That the motherhood of God, realization of the motherhood of God in the country. The second, the vision of the mother. Third, the knowledge of the mother. And the fourth is the perpetual contemplation. Perpetual, 24 hours. Perpetual contemplation, adoration, and service of the mother. And let me conclude with 2 quotes, one from Vivekananda and one from Sri Aurobindo. Sri Aurobindo says, spirituality is India's only politics. The fulfillment of Sanatana Dharma is only Swaraj. What is the meaning of Swaraj? The fulfillment of Sanatana Dharma is the only Swaraj. And spirituality is India's only politics. And let me conclude with a mighty utterance of Swami Vivekananda. Vivekananda says, up India, conquer the world with your spirituality. My thanks, my heartfelt thanks and gratitude to Assam University. Let me conclude here. Thank you.